Hi everyone and welcome back to the Bake Wellbeing Kitchen, and today I'm going to show you how to make some miniature Victoria sponges perfect for tea parties and for a tea and talk. This recipe is really nice and simple, so a fantastic one for beginner bakers as it teaches you the standard foundations to all sponges, including butter, sugar, flour and eggs. If you can master a Victoria sponge, then you're ready to move on to something more complicated. And here they are. So with the Victoria sponge, you've got these beautiful layers of spongy, fluffy cake, and sandwiched in between, you've got your super sweet buttercream, and then you've got a thin layer of strawberry jam. Perfect. With this recipe we're going to go through today, you can also use it to make one large traditional sized Victoria sponge. So an 8-inch, 20cm round tin would be perfect for that. But if you want to make these really cute little mini ones, then you're going to need a large rectangular pan. I'm using a 37cm by 25cm pan, but if you were to use one a little bit bigger, it would just make your sponge layers a bit thinner, and a bit smaller would make them a bit chunkier. So it's very flexible. So pop your fan oven onto 160 degrees and let me take you through it step by step. Okay, so let's begin. Firstly, you're going to need 300 grams of all of your ingredients. So I've got my standard soft baking butter, normal caster sugar, 300 grams of eggs, which we weigh, or come to that later, and 300 grams of self-raising flour. So I'm going to start off by simply adding the butter into the bowl and just starting to soften that up a little bit with my spoon. So if you've seen my other YouTube videos, you'll know that I always do this before I add in the sugar, and it just helps to soften up the butter and make it easier to combine the sugar in. I've left this at room temperature for a while, so it's really nice and soft. And when that's all smoothed out, I'm going to add in the caster sugar. I'm going to do this in 2 halves, just to make sure that I get a really good combined mixture, and also just to make it a little bit more manageable if you're doing it by hand. So I like to show you guys my tutorials by hand. I think it gives it a nice kind of homey feel, and sometimes it's just too easy with the electric mixer or with the KitchenAid. So when I'm making kind of small quantities of something, I like to go back to the old-fashioned method. So when that's looking fluffy, I'm going to add in the rest and do the same. Beating these 2 ingredients together for as long as you can is going to leave you with a really soft and airy sponge, which is what we want. So I'm going to do this for as long as I can until my arm can't take it any longer. And with an electric mixer or KitchenAid, I would do this for sometimes up to about 10 minutes. Okay, once I can feel my pulse in my arm, then we're good. I'm now going to move on to whisking my eggs. So I say this in every video that I use eggs, but it's really important that you weigh these in their shells first and get the measurement of the eggs as close to the rest of the ingredients as possible, so that will give you a really nice and even mix. I've got about 330 grams of eggs here. That's as close as I could get it to 300 grams. So I'm going to use all of them and then just keep a little bit of egg left back at the end. And also, by beating the egg first, you get a much fluffier mixture. So I'm just going to give these a good whisk. I always think that the yellower the egg, the better, but I don't know if that's an actual fact. And I have to say, from using both types of eggs, I've found that using organic or free-range eggs really does make your cake actually taste better. So I'm going to add in the egg bit by bit, and again this is just to make it more manageable and to make sure the mixture doesn't curdle too much. But don't worry and don't be scared of a curdling mixture, because as soon as you add in the flour it'll fix that. Just slowly combining this in, and once that's looking good, add in the rest. I've made this mistake far too many times using my KitchenAid when I've added the raw egg or the flour or icing sugar and going in too fast, and it just ends up everywhere. Great, and once the egg is all incorporated into the mixture, I'm going to start to add in the self-raising flour. So I'm going to need a whisk for this and a spoon just to help me add in the flour, again bit by bit. Then going to sieve that in and start to fold it in. So for folding, we're just taking from the bottom with our spoon and over the top. And this is a really slow movement because we don't want to beat out all of the air bubbles here and lose that soft, fluffy and light sponge. Once that lot is gone, I'll add in some more. Okay, so once that's looking pretty good and most of the lumps of flour are out, I'm going to take my favourite little utensil, which I use just to make sure that I've got all the pockets of flour combined into the mixture. So I'm going to start by just taking everything down from the sides of the bowl and then just scraping it across the bottom where the flour likes to sit. You should see lots of bubbles coming out of this, which is a good sign. And then I'm just going to add about 1.5 cups of vanilla essence and give that a good mix. Great, that's all done. So I'm going to pop this to the side and I'm going to grab my tins. So you're going to need some greaseproof paper to line your tins with. Just going to draw around the base of the tin and cut it to size. And then because my tin edge is rounded, I'm just going to cut off the corners. And to get this stuck down, I'm just going to use a little bit of butter to grease the tin. This is going to act as a little bit of a glue for the greaseproof paper. Then I'm going to do the same for the sides. So I'm going to cut a strip that's just about as wide as the tin and just trim into the bottom. Then I'll butter up the sides and stick that down. And I'm just going to repeat that for the other sides. Lovely, so once that's pretty much completely covered, it doesn't have to be perfect, just as long as most of the metal is covered, I'm then going to put in a thin layer of my batter. So this is no professional tin. It is literally a roasting tin that I do my potatoes in. But for this cake, we want a nice long slab of sponge, so it's just perfect for that. I'm just going to smooth it out as best I can. And once that's looking all nice and smooth, I'm going to pop this in the oven for about half an hour. I'm going to check it at half an hour, and if it needs a little bit more time, then I will check it every 5 minutes from then. So while the cake's in the oven, I'm now going to start on the filling. So we're going to start with the lovely, fluffy vanilla buttercream to go in the centre of the Victoria sponges first. And for this, I've got 200 grams of salted butter, and this is just the butter that comes in the foil. And I've got 400 grams of icing sugar. So the perfect buttercream ratio is always 1 part butter to 2 parts icing sugar. So the butter goes into the bowl first. This has again been at room temperature for a while, so it should be quite soft. I'm just going to break it up a little bit with my spatula just before I use my electric hand mixer to do the rest. And that's just going to really help to soften up this butter. So now I should literally be able to just spread it with my spatula. And now I'm going to start to add in the icing sugar by just sieving it in. So for some people's buttercream, they use slightly less icing sugar, but because I use a salted butter, it actually means that you can use a bit more icing sugar to make it super fluffy, and it doesn't end up being way too sweet. I'm going to start to combine these first with just the spatula to make it a little bit easier, and then I'll use the electric hand mixer once it gets too difficult to combine by hand. Okay, so I've now added in all of the icing sugar, and you can see that it's starting to get a little bit crumbly. So that's when I'm now going to grab the hand mixer and give it a whisk. So even when I've got the electric hand mixer, I like to still switch between the two using the spatula and the hand mixer so that I can still get a really good mix. And once it's looking nice and soft and combined, I'm then just going to whiz it for about 5 minutes to get it as light and fluffy as I can. And once that's turned a really nice white colour, I'm going to add in 1.5 cups full of vanilla essence. And then I'm going to whiz that in. Lovely, and finally I'm going to take my spatula again and just take all of the buttercream down off the side and make sure that is all nicely combined into the buttercream as well. Perfect. Okay, and here the sponge comes out of the oven, and here she is. So I'm just going to leave the cake to cool for a little while in the tin. As you can see, I've left some holes in here, and that's where I've put a knife through at about half an hour to see if the insides were cooked. And you can tell that by if the knife is wet when it comes out of the cake, so therefore it'll need a little bit longer in the oven. Once it comes out just a little bit oily, it's ready to take out of the oven. So once the sponge has had a little bit of time to cool, I'm just going to turn it out onto a chopping board or onto a clean surface and remove the grease-proof paper. And then I'm going to take a nice large and sharp bread knife, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut sort of roughly in the centre and slice this cake into two. And then I'm just going to pop the top slice to the side for now. Just going to make sure that the sponge is completely cool now and I can't feel any warmth coming off of it. Otherwise your buttercream will start to melt as soon as it touches the sponge. So I'm going to grab the buttercream now and I'm going to spread a thin layer across the sponge here. So you can use a knife or a spatula here, anything that's just nice and flat to give you a really smooth surface. Get it right up to the edges and into the corners. Now once that's looking nice and evenly spread out, I'm going to pop that to one side and I'm going to cover the other half of the cake. So I'm just going to turn this one over because I'm going to use the inside of the cake as the part which sandwiches the sponge together. And again, I'm going to make sure that that's nice and cool. Then I'm going to grab my strawberry jam and I'm just going to spoon some of this onto the sponge. You can use a smooth jam or a jam with whole strawberries in, whatever you would prefer. And the Victoria sponge is traditionally done with strawberry jam, but you can use any jam you want really. And once that's looking nicely covered, again all the way up into the edges and the corners, we're now going to cut our little round circles for the cakes. So I've got a round cutter here of around 6 centimetres wide, and I'm going to use this to cut small circles of the sponge and then sandwich them together to make our little Victoria sponges. There we go. Now I'm going to wash this because I need to reuse it for the other side. Now all of this is going to go into the bowl of offcuts, and we're now going to cut the other half and then sandwich them on top. And once they are all paired up, the rest of this is also going to go in the offcuts bowl. And the last thing to do is just to give them a little sprinkling of icing sugar. And there you go, there are your mini Victoria sponges. Perfect for a tea party, and they're ready to serve. Thanks so much for joining us again today, and I hope you enjoyed the bake. Let us know if you do try this one, send us some pictures and leave your comments below. And I'd really recommend making this one for yourself or a family member and inviting someone you love to sit down with a tea and your mini Victoria sponge and have a chat. There's nothing better than baking or eating cake for your mental health. Thanks again, see you next week.